Okay, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Mr. Secretary General, sir, very big pleasure to have you, a real honor. On behalf of the Commander, Vice Admiral Chris Grady, United States Navy, and the Deputy Commander, Rear Admiral Guy Robinson, Royal Navy, I'd like to welcome you, sir, to Naval Striking and Support Forces, NATO. My name is Brigadier General Karsten Heckel. I'm the Chief of Staff here, United States Marine Corps. And I'm going to present to you, sir, here for the next about 6 to 7 minutes, and I want everyone to know that we've allowed time in case there are any comments or questions at the end. But I'm going to present to you a very condensed version of our command brief, sir, and again, as we go along, I'll be glad to answer any questions or address any comments you may have. This is the agenda I'll cover, sir, for the next 6.5, 7 minutes. Our mission. Strike Force NATO's mission is in accordance with the technical arrangement between the Supreme Allied Commander Europe, SACEUR, and the U.S. Department of Defense that was signed back in 2012. Highlights are that Strike Force NATO is OPCOM directly to SACEUR. Our staff core competency is to execute expeditionary operations from the sea, the maritime domain, and our focus is on the integration of U.S. naval and amphibious forces in NATO, including command and control of maritime ballistic missile defense assets. Based on this mandate, sir, I think it's important to highlight for you that Strike Force NATO has a mission in 4 of the 5 graduated response plans as they are currently configured at the operational and JFC Joint Force Command level and OPCOM to SACEUR. So obviously, sir.
On the ballistic missile defense.
Yes, sir.
Meaning that you have a role to play when it comes to the Aegis ships.
We do, sir. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. That's correct, sir. Yeah. So for everybody's situational awareness, there are 4 permanently forward deployed Aegis-class Arleigh Burke destroyers in Rota. At any given time, there are assets out patrolling their area of responsibility. If something happens, we would assume control, and I'll touch on that in a minute, sir. Yeah. Our organization, Strike Force NATO, is commanded by Vice Admiral Chris Grady, United States Navy, who also commands the U.S. 6th Fleet. The combined power, knowledge, and experience of the 6th Fleet staff and the Strike Force NATO staff under one commander delivers a very effective capability. At the same time, the Strike Force NATO staff is continuously engaged and working with NATO commands, allies, and partner nations to ensure interoperability. Because as we all know, without interoperability, none of our operations function properly and smoothly. Strike Force NATO is also a memorandum of understanding organization supported by 12 nations whose flags are displayed on the slide in front of you now. Canada and Denmark are currently evaluating membership. Strike Force NATO staff personnel from each of the member nations brings expertise from their country's navies and other services to the team, helping to best integrate their capabilities into our plans, which are in direct support of the alliance. Strike Force NATO's placement within NATO. The graphic represents the NATO command and force structure layout and depicts Strike Force NATO's placement within the force structure. As you know, in order to fulfill the current NATO level of ambition, some of the NATO force structure land headquarters, listed in the green depicting on the graphic, are also certified as joint headquarters for the conduct of small joint operations. Based on its specific configuration, amphibious expertise, and projected level of forces available, Strike Force NATO was also achieved Joint Headquarters certification in 2014, and so we recertified in 2016, with that peculiar denomination of Maritime Expeditionary. Focusing on delivering an initial entry capability at up to strategic distance, Strike Force NATO is the only headquarters fulfilling the Joint Headquarters Maritime Expeditionary role. As highlighted by the red line shown in the graphic, sir, Strike Force NATO is permanently OPCOM directly to SACEUR, specifically for the inherent capability and mission to integrate into NATO the high-end U.S. maritime and amphibious forces, the carrier strike groups, and the expeditionary strike groups in what is addressed as the expanded task force role. And I'll touch on that in a moment, sir. And here's the slide, sir, where I'll be explaining the ballistic missile defense as well. Our roles. The Joint Headquarters Maritime Expeditionary I alluded to earlier. the capability of commanding a small joint operation, delivering joint effects from the maritime across multiple domains at strategic distance, and with minimal support from land infrastructure and host nations. This is a scalable force at the 2 or 3-star level, depending on the forces assigned and the mission. Exercise Baltops is a good example of how we exercise this role. Maritime ballistic missile defense. Should credible intel indicate a possible ballistic missile attack on NATO territory, the U.S. will transfer authority of ballistic missile defense capable assets to NATO. Strike Force NATO, we, will assume OPCON, employ and sustain maritime BMD ballistic missile defense units into an integrated air and missile defense structure. Our Joint Operations Center, sir, in this building, 1 floor down, is fully equipped for command and control of the maritime ballistic missile defense mission. I would also like to emphasize that the Strike Force NATO ballistic missile defense team has been instrumental in developing the doctrinal and operational framework to provide NATO with the initial maritime BMD capabilities and, in the longer run, to integrate emerging ones. Lastly, the NATO Expanded Task Force. This is our longest standing role, that of the Expanded Task Force, specifically a task force in which the maritime component brings to bear high-end U.S. forces, namely the Carrier Strike Groups, the CSGs, and the Expeditionary Strike Groups, the ESGs. Training for this primary core role as a deployable 3-star NATO Expanded Task Force is achieved mostly in the Bold Alligator exercise series conducted on the East Coast of the United States. Bold Alligator 18 edition will merge with a major NATO event, Exercise Trident Juncture 18, sir, off your home country of Norway, sir, later this year. In summary, the main takeaways about Strike Force NATO I would like to emphasize are, first, our mission is to integrate U.S. Navy and Marine Corps combat power through U.S. Carrier and Expeditionary Strike Groups and BMD units into a wider NATO battle force. Second, Strike Force NATO is an operational level, predominantly maritime headquarters, directly under the operational command of the Supreme Allied Commander Europe. Third, we are an experienced 3-star led battle staff ready to deploy on 5 days' notice to move. All of this, sir, makes Strike Force NATO an extremely flexible and agile tool on behalf of the NATO alliance and is a very responsive entity at SACEUR's immediate command. That concludes my formal brief, sir, and at this point, any questions you may have, sir, or any comments I can address.
I have one question that is related to the process we are in now, where we are adapting NATO command structure. And as you know, we are planning to have a command for the Atlantic. And what do you have any recommendations or any views on the role of Strike Force NATO?
Sir, under SHAPE's direction, we provided quite a bit of input, and I actually have my duty expert back there, Captain John Labruzzo. We provided a lot of input, sir, and most of our input was taken on board. And other than what I can talk about in an open forum, we continue to support the implementation at this point. We're actively engaged in all phases, sir, and we'll see what comes out of it. Yes, sir. Obviously, so the NATO command structure adaptation is a massive effort and a good one. It's important, and we're engaged.
As you know, we will make decisions at our defense ministerial meeting in Brussels.
Yes, sir. Right.
Thank you so much.
Okay, sir. And I think I'll be followed by NCIA.